Hey again, it's William at Boxer 2 Valve, and we're back at it again. Last time we put the gearbox in and got the air filter housing, starter was replaced, starter cover, all that was replaced with new cool stuff. And today we're gonna keep moving along so we can get this thing rolling on two wheels again, which will be a big event. And we'll get that swing arm prepared. I got it right here, and we're going to be getting that ready to install and then keep moving right along. So let's get started. This is your basic mono lever swing arm. It's a little bit grimy, but we'll clean that up in a bit. And first of all, remove this clamp off of here. So this thing's been over tightened probably at one point. It's pretty common that the screw gets bent. And then they're kind of a pain to get out of there. We're going to be replacing the clamp anyway. Rather than fight that screw, I'm just going to cut that thing off of there. Not worth saving. It's pretty much, well, the screw's bent and the clamp is kind of bent and it's discolored, and we're going to put a nicer one on anyway, so that's all good. Plus we're going to replace this boot, so that can all come off of there. All right, so this one has a little bit of notching, but it's not too bad. So I think that we probably can run it. There's really I don't really feel any bad play in here. So, but we'll go ahead and take it apart because that's an important thing to do. Now, there's of course a special tool for that, and it looks like this, and it is basically what has to happen here is we need to compress the spring that's inside of here. We need to compress the drive shaft and then get in there and pop a little snap ring off to take it apart. And that's what this tool's for. It basically holds the drive shaft in place while you tighten these screws in. It compresses it. Now, I've made one before, this tool here, and it also works just fine. So easy enough to make something like this without spending a ton of money. Just took some steel plate with a hole saw, made some holes in here so that you can get to the snap ring, and some threaded rod, and yeah, no big deal. This works just as well. But just since we happen to have the real deal, we might as well use it. And it, you see, has a little raised part on here which fits on, the drive shaft fits onto. The way that I did it with my homemade tool is instead of having that raised part, basically I had a hole instead. So that fits in like that. You see, it does the same thing, hold it captive, because you don't want to load the spring up and have it go wing off to the side. So that was the thought behind that, and it worked fine. So that fits in like that, and then we'll just loosen these two screws up here. And there you have it. Holds that in place. This is located on the plate, and all we need to do now is tighten up those two nuts. All right, so now you can actually probably see right inside of here, right there, that the snap ring is sticking up now, and I'll be able to get in there. So I'll get some glasses on because this thing can go flying somewhere. You don't want it to go flying into your eye, but you can get in and just pop it off. And you'll always want to replace this ring too when you take it apart. All right, now we can loosen those nuts on the tool again. All right, so now this should come off, but it's sometimes a little bit of a chore. You need to just maybe help it a little bit. It's going to be it's going to be tight getting it off of there, usually. So what you can do is use something like the bearing separator right underneath that chamfer. And then take something like this, a brass punch, and just give that a couple taps. It should dislodge it, hopefully. Here it comes. That's all there is to that. Then this part here comes out. And then there's a big old spring in there. And that's how the drive shaft is removed. And there's this piece here too. So let's look at what this all means, what this is all going on here. So you've got this part here. Fits on there, that spins. Spring on there like so. This guy goes in there like so. And then you see these ramps here, here, fits together like that. And so what happens is that this is under spring tension, and then when you abruptly change gears or anything, or any sort of tension in the drivetrain, this will push against that spring tension. It'll roll up that ramp, and that'll help to kind of cushion the drive, so it's not solid like the drive shafts were up through 1980. In 81, this is when the system sort of started. And this is, of course, a mono lever, but even if you have an 81 on dual shock machine, the principle here will be the same with the shock drive. The disassembly procedure will be the same, all that sort of thing. So that's that. And then the other part I forgot to mention is this ring fits on top like that, and there's the little recess there where the ring with this little snap ring will go in. And that's the whole assembly right there. So I'm just gonna want to clean everything up here. It's pretty grimy, and then we'll put that back together after we've taken out the swing-arm bearings, which will be the next thing. So here again on this mono lever, the swing-arm bearings are the same as any 81 and later model BMW. They went to a different kind of bearing. This is a sealed bearing that is in contrast to the earlier models, which was the regular tapered roller bearing, and it had a seal ring on top, and you could grease it from the outside, all that sort of thing. These are pre-greased, they're a sealed bearing, and they don't require or can they receive any sort of maintenance. They're good for the lifespan of the bearing. And so whenever you have something apart this far, you should replace them. I think that you can actually probably feel maybe some notching in there. You can always check for that. But essentially, you got to remember that a swing arm bearing, any kind of swing arm bearing, is not rotating, so it's not wearing evenly. It's just moving back and forth, and that, a gazillion times. So it's gonna wear into the race and eventually get notchy and affect handling, your suspension to some extent. So that's a good thing to change, and we're definitely gonna do that right now. And you need a way to get those old bearings out of there, and the Kuko puller is, I think, the best one that I can come up with for doing that. You see, we use this tool quite a lot in these videos, and it's pretty darn cool. So I'm going to start with the smaller, which spans from 14 to 19 millimeter, and it will fit in and grab that in a race. Now, oftentimes it'll break the bearing. It'll pop it apart, but let's see what happens. Let's just see what happens. So I got that tight, and now with this setup, you do need some adapters, which we also offer, but this is going down to a, I think it's a 7 millimeter, strange size, but yeah, 7 millimeter stud. And then this is the other adapter. We'll put all that together like this. Okay, there's the setup. Put the jaws out to the outer edge or beyond the outer edge of the bearing, and with all the adapters, and this expanded, and now we'll take our big 32mm wrench and start to remove this bearing. Hopefully it all comes out at once, but we'll see. Yeah, kind of like I suspected. It basically broke the bearing. And you see what's in there is really not a lot different than the front wheel bearing one, or the bearings for the pre-81, but they are like they're different. They're sealed and they need to be used. So now that we've destroyed the bearing, yeah, the grease looks kind of like it's seen better days, so we're going to continue. But I kind of figured that was going to happen. So I got the other Kuko puller, which is this one. This is a 21-5, which is from 28 to 40 millimeters. And that one is the next size that's going to go in and grab that inner race. So unless you can find a way to get that inner one out of there in a better way, you kind of need both of these pullers for this job, invariably, because whenever you apply pressure to this inner race, this is invariably what happens. So that's that. And I will pull this one off and don't need this adapter anymore. Okay, going to tighten first of all the expanding puller tool, and then sort of position around the outer edge there. And let's get this thing tightened up and see what happens now. And that's it. Oh, and by the way, maybe you're wondering why today I'm not wearing gloves working on this grimy thing. Well, there's a really honest, simple answer. Is I don't have any. I can't buy any. Anyway, back to work. So look at that. It was definitely a worthwhile thing to change. You can really see the wear pattern that's established, and actually I can feel it too. And so, you know, you can totally kind of imagine what's going on with that. This bearing is really just doing this all its life, just moving like like that. And so it's going to wear those kind of marks in there. And also you can see here is there's this little lip on the top of this bearing and this corresponding lip here. So these pieces, like, they snap together when they're like that. That's basically it. But they're a sealed unit and pre-greased, and that's the new replacement here that we offer. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean out all this old grease on both sides. I'm gonna pull this other bearing out, and then we'll clean this all up and we'll start sticking everything back together again. That was that. And now this is about as stripped down as it can be. I'm gonna go clean it up. It's in pretty good shape. I mean, I didn't want to powder coat this because I didn't want to give up that sticker with the VIN number and the production date and all that stuff. That's always a pretty cool thing to have, I think. So I'm gonna go clean this up and we'll put it back together. Okay, when you're putting these new bearings in, you want to put force against the outer race. And of course, there's this little plastic dust seal on there that's going to get smashed if you do that. So you need to remove that. It just pulls right off like that. And so once you've removed that, you won't forget to put it back in, of course, you'll be able to now hopefully find a tool that will enable you to smack that bearing race in. You want to just be applying force to the outer edge. So the trick is going to be to have something that's going to hit around the outside of that edge. And so in other words, it needs to be some sort of cylinder or something like that. The outside diameter of this bearing is 40 millimeters. So you need something that's 40 millimeters. So I've got this. This is something not everybody's going to have, but it's a front crankshaft bearing from an R35. And it just happens to be the perfect size. And you can see how that's just going to hit around the bottom of that. So that's what I'm going to use. You know, just got to figure something out. It's 40 millimeter tubing of some sort. If you've got a front main bearing out, or front main bearing out of a pre-war bike, that you might be set to. And then set that on there. We're just going to tap that baby in. Bam, all the way in. And now that plastic dust seal that we took out can be just pushed right back into place. And you're all set. You go on to the other side. Yes, the other side takes the exact same bearing, same procedure. Alrighty, so that's all good to go. Let's put the drive shaft back in now. What the heck? Let's put it together with the homemade tool and see how that works. I think it works just as good. Okay, it goes in with that little chamfered recessed area up, of course, for that snap ring. Yeah, and this is one of those things. There's no easy way. You're just going to have to get that sucker on there. It's not always the easiest thing to do, but it's doable. Okay, so I've got these pliers I use for a lot of different things. These are just like basically really old piston ring pliers that have been modified a gazillion times. And you use snap ring pliers, something that moves, you know, pushes pressure outward. You can kind of set the ring on there, maybe grab a piece of it at the opening, and then with a little luck, you can kind of slip it down at least part of the way over onto the spline. Might take a few tries. Okay, so once you kind of got it hooked a little over, then give it a little help with a screwdriver or two. Snap it right into place. There we go. Looks like that's it. Double check, make sure it's in the groove properly. Okay, it looks good. Now, just loosen this fancy tool. There, works just as good as the factory tool, I would have to say. Okay, now we're just gonna really look at this. Again, make sure that that ring is down inside of the little groove on there, and it looks fantastic. So this part is ready to reinstall. Let's head back over to the bike. Okay, it's a heck of a lot easier to put the swing arm in when the battery is not there. It's a lot easier to get to the drive shaft bolts and the boot. And so the first thing we'll do is we'll put the boot on this swing arm. It's just easier to do that way. And when you look at the swing arm boot, you'll examine it and you'll find that it's got some markings on it in German. It says oben, that means top, means up. And it says Getriebeseite, that means transmission side. And so that's stamped here. So this goes that way onto there. This will be top, that's towards the transmission. So through the process of elimination, this is the side that's going to go on to the swing arm. And just slip that around there. Make sure that's on nice and as straight as can be. Okay, and then we're going to put a new clamp on there. We've got these in the original style, but also these are pretty cool in stainless steel. So that's what I'm going to use here. And we can put the clamps on once it's installed, but it's just sometimes a little easier to deal with this like that. So we'll go ahead and sit this into the bike now. And then the swing arm pivots, they go through the bearing, push into the bearing. Just screw that in like so. You can eyeball this, or you can get a little more precise, and you want to have the gap about the same. Like here, for example, I've got right around 4 millimeters when I go between the frame and the swing arm. And see what we have on the other side. About 5. So it could theoretically come back this way just a little bit. So I'm just going to loosen that a little bit, tighten this a little bit, try to get it pretty centered. So 4.3, I think on the other side I got 4.27, so it doesn't get really any better than that. So that's the basic installation. I've just snugged down those bearings a little bit by hand, and now what we'll do is we'll torque them. So the first thing you do, you could do all torquing on one side. So like I'm just going to go over to the right hand side, and I'm just going to tighten the 27 millimeter nut. So that's nice and tight. All right, and finally, just going to torque that to spec, make sure that that's correct. That's all good. Then that's all good and tight. I can go in, and then we'll go make our adjustments on the other side. Remember, I like to use this old dial torque wrench that I've had for a long time. It's really pretty cool. It's in foot-pounds. So first we're going to do is preload the bearing to about 20 foot-pounds just to really get everything nice and tight, and then back off of it completely, and then preload it to about 7. Just like that. These type of bearings need to have a little bit of preload. And so by doing it that way, we've basically overloaded it, backed off, and then just come up on it, and we've got a little bit of preload on those tapered roller bearings. And now we can just go ahead and lock that nut. That's it. And so that is all set. Next thing I'm going to do is put on the final drive and shock absorber. A lot of these bikes, the earlier machines had a gasket that went between the final drive and the swing arm, but the monolever does not use that. It's got a very, very close fit to it, very tight fit. So we're just going to introduce those splines of the drive shaft and put that into place. So these are the old nuts that came off of there, and they could easily be reused, or they could be replaced with the same cadmium plated replacement parts. But what we also can do, and here they are, as a matter of fact, I went ahead and pulled all those. Here's the cadmium plated replacement parts. They're basically the new equivalent of what came off of there. But we've also got something I think is kind of cool, a little bit of bling, stainless steel, and here's the ones. Which one would you use? I think I'm going to go with the stainless steel on this motorcycle. And in this particular case, I'm going to put a little bit of Loctite on these nuts. Don't have to go too nuts, but just a little bit is a good thing. Just medium strength is what I'm using here. These can be a very tight fit to get the wrench in there. I actually have a because there's a weld bead right there, and there's nothing to it. I have actually this wrench here that it ground down a little bit on the end of it so that it'll fit, but it's still a tight fit. But it's not that big of a deal. You might have to modify a tool to make this work. Cool. All right, next thing we'll do is, now let's put the shock back on again. And this is a YSS shock. These are actually really pretty cool. And that's what this bike had on it when we got it, and we're gonna run it. There's two versions of this shock. This is the more basic one. It's got rebound damping and pretty much infinitely adjustable manual spring tension, spring preload. But there's another one that has some more features as well, but we'll run this one. We'll see how it goes. I have one of these on another bike. It works very well. So here again, a little bit of Loctite on that upper fastener. I think a new nut is in order here. So we go ahead and do that. All right, on. Before we can put the drive shaft bolts in or any of that, we need to get the brakes sorted out. That's an important part of it. So I've got some new brake shoes and springs here. First thing we need to do is put this actuating arm in. There's these two O-rings which I'm going to replace on there. They just need to sort of pop them out. All right, a little bit of grease on the shaft is not a bad idea. You can use different kinds of grease on the brake parts. What works pretty well is this LM508, sort of an NICs and has a copper base. And you don't need much, but it's just gonna make sure that we get a good pivoting action in there for many, many miles. And no corrosion will settle. I'm just gonna coat that a little bit like so and put that in. There we go. And then also a little bit of this is a good idea to put on this brake cam. Because it is a moving surface. Don't go too crazy because we don't want that going anywhere else onto the brakes or anything, but it's a very good lubricant for this application here. So what you do is you just simply put the brake springs in like that. And then there's this rubber damper. There was a service bulletin that came out in about 1987, I think, because these had, the model ever had a lot of brake squeal problems. And so the solution was this silicone rubber damper. And so if your bike doesn't have one, if you have a model ever, it's a good time to put it in. Always replace the brake springs at the same time when you do it. But it just sets in there like this. And it's gonna go in between the spring and the cam here. So with that sort of held in place, we can just take these brake parts and finagle this guy into position. Pretty much like that. And then I'm take the actuating arm and put it on the splines here to just rotate this. We'll position it in a moment. But now we can get this part sort of all lined in there. And that's how that's supposed to be. Now we could reinsert the clip that came off of here originally. That just pushes on. So that's all pretty sano. Everything looks pretty good there. All right. Great, now we can actually put the wheel back on. And this is that rear wheel that I ended up getting hold of. The old one was completely shot. The brakes were shot. That's been sitting around for a long time, so I'm just gonna clean off the brakes surface. Sure is a lot easier to put the wheel on without the exhaust installed. So we might as well take advantage of that. Okay, the wheel's not torqued, of course, but it's on there. And now we can come back over to this side and get this part sorted out. So continuing with the brake, I've got the rear brake arm. I cleaned it up pretty good. It looks pretty nice, you know. I think it'll be fine. Cleaned out the brake pivot pin. It's got some wear, but I think totally serviceable. So I'm going to grease that up really good. And then here's the original brake rod that came off. And it's totally okay. I mean, but you see it's got some discoloration. It looks like maybe some battery acid got on it, sprayed on there, or somehow it got corroded. So it's not the most beautiful thing. It's technically totally serviceable, but we've got the ability to replace it. Not a terribly expensive part. And I believe these aren't available from BMW anymore. I'm not sure, that's what I heard, but we have them in the original cadmium plated finish, which is pretty cool, pretty original. And also, if you like, we have them in stainless steel, which is even better, perhaps. So, in a bit of a quandary, I think I'm going to go ahead and use the original finish color one on there. Kind of like that, but it's nice to have options. And so that's what we're going to do. Take the sticker off here. Well, let's start by greasing up that bushing. I cleaned it all out really well before. I'm going to use this long-lasting grease, the LM47. Works pretty well in this application. Just going to pack some in there pretty well. Get that moved around. Okay, well, that's good to go. Okay, and the brake rod, actually going to use the copper-based paste on there. These do tend to get kind of stuck and corroded. And in hindsight, I should have probably put the brake back on before I put the swing arm on. That would have been the smart thing to do, but I'm not taking it all back apart again. There's going to be a workaround. Get that sort of started in there. Oh, it took a little bit of fiddling to get that, but don't make that dumb mistake. Put the brake rod back in sooner than I did in the process, but it all worked out. So I got that all set up, and the bolt goes back in. Now, this is a especially hard bolt. It's a special bolt for this application, so if you do wind up replacing it, make sure that you replace it with the correct bolt, like that. And I'm going to put a new nut on the back side here. Great. So new felt can go on to the shaft here. So when I took this bike apart, the rear brakes were totally smoked, and I remember actually not being super convinced that the brake arm was in the right position, so I didn't bother to mark it because I figured at this point I'd sort of figure it out. So that's what I'm going to do now. Make sure this is not hitting anything. Okay, that's getting full movement. Okay, great. So holding the brake lever up and putting this on and getting to the point where you can feel the brake shoes making contact with the drum. This we want to wind up in here so we have just about the right amount of threads. So it's right around there, I think. Is going to be kind of a sweet spot for it. Right there. Let's see if that's true. Should we come back even a little bit more? That looks pretty good. Okay, I'm kind of liking that. It looks pretty good. You have a close to a 90-degree angle here when it's actuated, and also still some threads showing here, so I think that's a good spot. Then we're going to put this bolt back in. I replaced the bolt, and then you've also got a little pointer here that can kind of give you an idea of brake wear. As the brakes wear, this pointer will actually give you an indication of that wear. So I set it here at that top bar here. Now that we've got the brake working, we'll actually be able to hold the rear wheel still so that we can torque down the swing arm bolts. So let's get that done next, and then we'll circle back and finish up the rest of the final drive parts, oil, and what have you. You always want to replace the drive shaft bolts. These replacements that we have at the moment look like this, and they already have a thread locking fluid on them. So you can just put them in and torque them down, and they should be good to go. If you want to supplement that with some additional, there's no reason why you couldn't do that, I don't think, but these are really very effective, and they're very, very hard bolts. So what you need to do this, it looks like a fancy bolt, but it's just a 10 millimeter box end wrench that you need, and preferably a kind of a slim wrench like the snap-on one works the best. And then we're just gonna line things up here and start putting these bolts in. It's a little bit tedious, but it's not that bad. So it's just the way it came apart before. Just basically put in one at a time. When putting them back together, just run them in till they bottom and then back off a little bit for starters. And then back it off. That way everything stays a little bit loose, and then we can put the next one in. And then sooner or later you have the last bolt in, which is always a nice feeling. And we are gonna now go ahead and tighten them all up. And this is the reason why we did it in this order: get the wheel on, get the brakes working, because we need to block the rear wheel so that we can get these guys tight. And how tight? Well, there is a little special ring tool. Of course, it's a special tool. And you can hook it up to a torque wrench, but that's a pretty rare thing. I actually pretty much always done these by hand, as tight as I can go. Really, you break the wrench, you went a little overboard. But having had these come loose on me at speed before, realized the importance of getting them tight. So using a good quality wrench, lean on the brakes a bit and just tighten them down. Pretty darn good. Okay, I don't think those are going to come loose. Next, we'll get this boot on there. If you have a tool, something like this, some kind of hook tool, it can come in pretty handy for putting this boot on, because it's really hard to see. But one thing is for sure, is it's a whole lot easier to put the boot on when there's no battery box in. So this is definitely the right time to mess with this. All right, sooner or later you get this on there. Only one word of advice on putting the swing arm boot on is patience, because it can be, sometimes it goes easy, sometimes it's a real fiddly thing. All right, so now I'm going to put these cool stainless steel clamps on there. We've also got the original finish with the CAD plated, but I think these are pretty darn cool. So what I like to do on these is just get the screw started and kind of drawn in, and then rotate the screw part down underneath. And then just make sure everything's seated right, and then you can get in there and tighten that finally. And then the same with the rear one. The rear one's a little bit more funky because of the way that it sort of stretches around, but it's just a matter of getting it lined up the best you can. All right, that's pretty sano. Now, before I forget, I'm going to torque the wheel bolts, because it would be tragic to forget about that. So I don't have anybody to help me here. Well, I got my cameraman, my buddy here, but he's over there. I'm going to use my strap and put the brake on to hold everything. Already sort of tightened the wheel bolts by hand, but now we're going to go in and correctly torque them. Okay, they get about 100 newton meters, which is about 75 foot-pounds. But always check your torque specs, of course, in your manual. The other thing that would be tragic is if we forgot to put oil in it. So let's get that over with as well right now. So we'll look at a couple of these little fasteners that we have here. So this is the drain and filler bolts for the swing arm, and that you get these days from BMW. I think this is what we got where we got these from. They're kind of a yellowish finish. It's okay. The ones that came out of here are all corroded. I'm not going to reuse them, but we've also got them in stainless, which is pretty cool. And I think I'm going to roll those. And the threads on these are very susceptible to getting stripped out. You'll find that many times they've been over tightened. And if that's the case, we actually offer an oversized bolt in stainless steel so that you can do without a helicoil. You just basically need a one size larger tap. I think this is a 12, so it goes up to 14 millimeter, if I'm not mistaken. And that's one way to do it. Otherwise, we can put a time sert in, which is a good repair. But this guy's lucky here, doesn't have any broken threads. And here, once again, we can use an aluminum seal ring, or we can use the fiber-filled crush rings. We offer both. It's one of those things. I think I can, since the threads are so good on this one, I don't have any concerns about them necessarily stripping out. I will be sure not to over tighten, so I'm going to just run the aluminum ones on here. But because it is a stainless steel part, I'm going to put just a little bit of this copper paste on there, because stainless steel in aluminum can sometimes get a little bit wacky, but if you have a little bit of anti-seize on there, shouldn't pose any threats whatsoever. So we'll go ahead and put that one in first. Threads are a little bit funky looking, but still, you know, are all there. Then that will be the time to think about, for sure, going with one of these crush washers, because they don't need much tension to seal. Okay, we talked probably about that a lot. Anyway, okay, the drain plug for the final drive, also available in stainless, which is a real nice option, actually. And on that, so I'm going to once again put a little bit of anti-seize on there, because it is a stainless bolt. I'm going to put a crush washer on this one, because that's what I have at hand here. Here at the rear, I've already installed a new stainless steel plug. This is the plug that theoretically is used to check the level, but you know, that's what it's there for. Something I rarely would do, just drain it and refill it with the right amount, as we've talked about before. But so it's in there with a new crush ring, and now we're going to just fill in the oil to the final drive and onto the swing arm, and put in a measured quantity of 350 cc's and 150 cc's in there. This is the oil that we use and recommend, and it really is great stuff. It's the 85W90 GL5 from Liqui Moly, and it is a very, very good oil. And it works for the final drive, swing arm, and gearbox for all model years on these 2-valve twins. Prior to '69, the older bikes take a different oil, but that's all on our website if you have one of those older bikes. So I'm just gonna go ahead and measure out 350. And I'm a really big fan of this stuff, the MSO2 anti-friction for gears. And this is the tube. This is a 50-gram tube, and it's good. It's suitable for about 2.5 liters of oil, roughly. Now that's 350, so it's not even a half. So it doesn't take much, but I'm just going to put a nice little squirt in there. That should be plenty. And this stuff really makes helical gears very happy. Good stuff. All right, finish dumping any dregs in there that have settled. Okay. Now 150 for the swing arm. Okay. Doesn't matter if you put in before or after, but a little tiny squirt in here too, just because the needle bearings can also benefit from the properties of the molybdenum lubrication in there. So you could measure off 150 like I just did, and then you're going to need something like this, a small funnel or something. But another way to do it is kind of cool too, is with one of these syringes, because this one is graduated to 100. We have these on our website, and this actually makes the task even a little bit easier. What I do is just take the plunger out. I'll just put in 100 cc's in there. So it doesn't get much cleaner than that. Very cool, zero mess. So there's that. Now I'll put the plugs on the top too. All right, so that's pretty much it for today. I think we made pretty good progress. We've got the whole drivetrain reassembled, torqued, adjusted, filled with fresh lubricant. And what's left to do, and what we're going to do next time, is finish putting the motor back together, install those carburetors that we already have rebuilt, put the battery in, all that cool stuff, and then put the exhaust on and hopefully make some smoke. Next episode, the one after, we'll see how smoothly things go. But it's been a good time today again, and this is William from Boxer 2 Valve saying to you, we appreciate you watching these videos. Make sure you subscribe to them, join our newsletter, keep up on what we're doing at Boxer 2 Valve. Lots of new stuff always happening here. And we'll look forward to seeing you in the next video and bringing you some more fun times working on BMW motorcycles. Take care from North Carolina. It's William. Bye.